Welcome back into this edition of Making the Leap. What is DEI? This is a question that a lot of people are hearing about their school and their community and their government. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. You've probably heard it thrown around a lot. But I don't know if you really understand it. I don't think I fully understood it until I heard this conversation today with a woman who actually did it. Her job was literally this.
Right, and hired to promote these words, to actually address issues of equity, not even really equality, but making sure that experiences are like, I kind of think of it as that level playing field, no matter where you fall, making sure that you have access to things. It's funny, when I think of this word, I actually very specifically go back to when we first moved into our house out here, where we did not have internet. We did not have like any kind of Wi-Fi. We didn't have anything.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And we got called by, I don't even know if you remember this because it was so early on, we got called by the school to make sure that we were not experiencing any hardships or problems. And did we need any assistance with a hotspot to use for the kids, because they were legitimately not able to access like Google Classroom and things like that. They couldn't do it.
We literally lived in an area with no internet.
Right.
That's the truth.
And that is equity, right? Because if our kids cannot do the homework, they're at a disadvantage.
That's unequal.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. It's not, but they were willing to do what they could to offer us hotspots and to see what we could do for the kids. And because we didn't have what we needed, I would occasionally bring them into where you were working. We could sit down and work, and it was a legitimate thing. But that's the kinds of things we're talking about. That's one small example.
The word itself is not a bad word.
No.
Equity, equitable. No. You want things equal. You want people to be equal.
Right. If you have a home that doesn't have computers, if your home doesn't have running water, and therefore you have some disadvantages with how you function on a daily basis within your family, you have things to overcome and things to compensate for and things that need addressing. And that's where this whole idea of we all come from different experiences. How are we going to make this work for everyone? However, it is not an easy thing to address or define when you start moving away into things like oppression, when it refers to skin color and how that then plays into it.
Well, and that's the insidiousness of it. And that's where our guest today, Dr. Tabia Lee, you may have heard about her, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago now, several weeks ago. She caught my attention on the radio show. She'd written an editorial back then in the New York Post that she was a DEI director at a college out in the Bay Area of California called De Anza College. And what she was struck by right away, she said, was the rabid anti-Semitism. And this notion, she says, she's a black woman, incidentally, and she says, as a black woman, what I thought DEI was and what I saw it become on this college campus, and so many of my colleagues who embraced this kind of radical thing, she felt so alarmed by it, she had to tell the story. And so she did. And that's what we talked with Dr. Tabia Lee about today was, what is this? What she wants you to know, it really is, not the flowery words we just said were idealistic, but rather how dangerous and insidious it really is. So here's our conversation with Dr. Tabia Lee. We came across a fascinating column in the New York Post a while back, and if you didn't see it, odds are you've probably heard about it by now. The headline read, "I was a DEI director. DEI drives campus anti-Semitism." It was authored by a woman called Dr. Tabia Lee, and I was so intrigued by it that I said, well, we got to find her if she's willing to come on, and thankfully she was willing to come on and joins us now. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. Glad to be here.
I was talking with you a little bit before the conversation started, and I said, gosh, you've probably had a lot of attention because of this editorial. I guess since I read the initial editorial, you've been published in a couple of other spots.
Yes. Actually, one of them was before the editorial with the Journal of Free Black Thought. That was a piece that I wrote called DEI Colleagues, Your Anti-Semitism is Showing, and It's Time for an Ideological Reckoning. And then I also just recently had a letter to the editor published in the Wall Street Journal, which is outlining, just a response to one of the things that they had posted about campus anti-Semitism and wanting to inform people again of the critical social justice ideology roots of all of these things.
I'm thrilled to talk with you because I think you can give me and the audience a lot of insight into this concept of DEI generally. Before we get into your story specifically, I wanted to just talk about diversity, equity, inclusion as a concept and your role as a director of that initiative when hired. Can you help us, given what you've written and the way you say it's been sort of compromised, if not outright bastardized, as a vessel for anti-Semitism, which I appreciate and understand, help me, can we go back to kind of the root of DEI? Because I can tell you that a lot of people get very nervous these days when they hear it. How do you define it and describe it?
Well, there's many ways to define and describe it, and I think that that's something that's important for people to understand, Chris. In many places and sectors, education, corporate, civic life, we've seen DEI policies pop up. But what we haven't seen is a transparency about the ideologies that they're rooted in. And this is something that I have made central to my work. In the early 2000s, I coined this phrase, ideology in practice. It really is trying to raise awareness that there are different racial, gender, political, religious, and all sorts of ideologies that we embody and in practice in our teaching and in our educational policy. And in this instance, what we saw during the pandemic was this advancement of a specific kind of DEI work, which I call critical social justice work. And I hadn't encountered this myself until I had my experience that you may have heard of, in reading the article briefly there at De Anza College. It's a California community college. And when I was hired on there as a faculty director for the Office of Equity, Social Justice, and Multicultural Education, I came to discover very quickly that my understanding of those words was quite different than the people who were going to be making the decision around my tenure review process. Mm-hmm. And that difference is what led them to target me and bully and intimidate me and harass me. And when I wouldn't resign, they subverted my tenure review process to fire me. And that's exactly what took place after 2 years of a long, prolonged battle around that. And so how were they different? Prior to that, I've been in education my whole life. I've been a teacher my entire life. I joke around with people that, I've been teaching as long as I've been learning because I was a gifted and talented student and used as a peer tutor. But of course, I got, formal education and became a teacher and a teacher educator and taught in East LA public middle schools for many years and have done a ton of teacher trainings and so forth around, topics of inclusion, diversity, and so forth. And my understanding of equity was always the textbook definition of equity, which is fairness. And that was what I had encountered at all the institutions that I had worked at prior to that, my, public school experience. After I got my doctorate, the job search didn't go quite like I thought it would. So I did some adjunct or part-time teaching for quite some time. And most of the institutions where I worked were private Catholic universities. And they were using also a classical definition of social justice and understanding of equity as well. So I had always been in spaces where, people were meaning the same things when we talked about things. But I never assume anything. And I did over 60 hours of needs assessment conversations when I got to De Anza with faculty, staff, and all kinds of faculty, staff, and administrators. And I wanted to see what their on-the-ground definitions were. And what I discovered was from multiple people, we're all saying these words like equity and so forth, but we all mean different things. There was no institutional definition at that time, even though this is an institution that claims to have, this long history of doing social justice work and so forth. No one had ever sat down and defined it together. So that's why there's a lot of fragmentation.
Interesting. So
yeah.
May I ask on that point then, Dr. Lee, I trust you came at this from a place of goodwill. You say the words mean what they mean to you. Words mean things and they have a definition. So you came to the table in good faith and goodwill. I think a lot of us politically today get the sense that DEI is used as a tool to kind of foster a notion of certain types of people who look a certain way ought to be elevated because certain other people who look a certain way are oppressive. So I think a lot of us get prickly now hearing DEI, assuming one group's going to have to be marginalized if another is to be elevated. Is that a fair assessment of the way we look at it today versus the way you came into it?
So what you're describing is more what I've named the critical social justice perspective. And that's the name that I've applied to it because I think people need words to describe it when they're trying to talk about it with their, educational leaders and so forth. But that you've encapsulated some of the core principles of a critical social justice approach, viewing people as victims or oppressors of this hyper focus on race and gender identities. This you'll hear this concept called intersectionality that they talk about quite a bit. They try to put people on a power and privilege matrix and tell you that, you were born into this particular position of power and privilege, and you can never escape that. And as a result, you must do X or Y, to remedy the sins of your ancestors, if you will. Or to help uplift those, who were put down by your ancestors. So it's this focus on viewing everything through this lens of division of race and gender and really an anti-American sentiment as well embedded in it. And we see this a lot in our I encourage people to take a look in your local school and district. You'd be surprised if you just look up ethnic studies. There's a whole subgroup of classes around that. American studies, Latino studies, Filipino studies, gender studies, all of these, quote, whatever studies are usually rooted in these critical social justice ideologies. And if people took a look at the syllabi, I think they would be shocked, especially you hear American studies, right? You think that as a former civic educator, I think, oh, this is great. They're going to be learning about, America and, why we're one of the, models for the world in terms of, our republic and democracy. No, that's not what they learn at all. They learn how to be anti-American. They learn that America is founded on white supremacy and racism and all of these other concepts and constructs that as a parent or even an educator, you wouldn't anticipate that when you see the titles. You have to really get in there and dig deep and start asking some questions. And I encourage people to do that because these are the programs that have now become mainstreamed.
Yeah.
In part. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Lee, but this is one of those things that when this wasn't too terribly long ago, the school district that my wife and I had our children in, it was really in the last 3 or 4 years. It hasn't been 5, so it's a relatively new position in our children's school district that we ultimately ended up leaving, and that was a DEI director, and it was a well-paid position too. It's a 6-figure spot that was kind of created, and it was new to our district. So I again, I'm kind of gently asking because I don't want to offend you. You had that title, but you certainly don't come at it in the way I view it today. So should people, I guess my question is, should people be naturally suspicious now when a school district creates a DEI director? Should you instantly think, oh, that means trouble in your view, or no?
Well, what we've seen is an explosion, like you mentioned, Chris, of these positions. This has cropped up as a multi-billion-dollar industry, and a lot of people, have their stake in it. And the problem with it, no one's saying that people shouldn't learn to, work with each other and learn from diverse, cultures and all the people that make our community so great. No one's saying that. But what is being said is that sometimes, not sometimes, but too often, there is a default perspective being pushed and people aren't being transparent about it. If they would just be transparent, right? When your district brought that DEI person on, if they said, this person's role is going to be to decenter whiteness in the district. And that means that we're going to elevate the voices of, BIPOC. They use all these words that they've invented and inversions of words too.
That we
That's
can't
Black
define, by the way,
Indigenous.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's going to be their role. Those are the trigger, the terms that should be making you say, oh, hey, something's off here.
Yes.
What are BIPOCs? What are Latinxes? What are Philippinxes and all these X-ending words? Something's amiss. And as I mentioned to some people, I say, it's garbage in, garbage out. We're giving our children garbage, and we're telling them and teaching them to hate groups of people, to view themselves as victims or oppressors, to hate Jewish people, to hate Zionists, to hate America and American society. And that's not okay. And some legislators in some places like my home state, they're trying to make it a high school graduation requirement for students to take a, quote, ethnic studies class and to get fully indoctrinated by these toxic ideologies.
Wow.
And that's a big concern. As parents, some of us, we kind of stood on the sidelines and we said, like, okay, that's like some weird California stuff, or that's not happening here. I think now we're seeing it's happening larger and more widespread than we thought. And even if you don't have kids in schools, because some people said, my kids are out, like we're all good, right? We don't have to worry about it. Yes, we do. This is who's training our future medical professionals. This is who's training our scientists. This is who's training, all of our students are getting indoctrinated into these ideologies. And we've just kind of passively let it happen without pushing back, without questioning, without asking, our districts, what do you mean when you say DEI policy? What philosophy is that rooted in? Are you guys talking about a classical approach, where we're focusing on equality of opportunity? Or are you talking about a critical social justice approach where we're really talking about equality of outcomes in every meaning of the word? So
yes.
Those are the things that we need to start asking. And I hope my work and my research gives people the language, because a lot of this has really advanced through because they're using terms that sound on its face, right? Who doesn't want to be anti-racist, for example? Like, of course, I'm not a racist.
Yeah, equal, equity, equal. Everybody wants to be equal, treated equally. Sure, yeah.
Exactly. And so the words sound like things that you would, instinctively agree with, but what they mean and what the philosophy that it's rooted in is something that's very dangerous. It's demotivating for the very students it purports to help. We can see that even in the test scores, which are still flatlining everywhere and actually have worsened where we see these DEI officers installed. There was a piece by the Heritage Foundation recently where they outlined the presence of these DEI chief diversity officers for, not just Black students and Latino students, but white students, all students, was depressed and went down when these people were hired on and brought in.
Wow.
And that's what they were supposed to be there to do, right? To close the achievement gap.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked because what they're doing is toxic, and they're actually demotivating all students by focusing on that.
May I ask you, Dr. Lee, specifically about the anti-Semitism you say you encountered? And by that, you're not Jewish, to my understanding. Is that right?
Right. And I always find it interesting when people ask that question. That's a question that's only been asked of me recently. But I've been teaching, as I mentioned, for over 30 years, and I've always done work around anti-Semitism, Holocaust education, Jewish inclusion. That's just been part of my work. So
yeah,
it's not the responsibility only of Jewish people.
Of course not.
And talk about Jewish inclusion.
I ask it only as a framing question because I think it's a more remarkable story that it isn't as though you come in hardwired as a Jewish person to be, some might out from the outside suggest you're hypersensitive to something. You came in eyes wide open as a non-Jewish person at this college, and you recognized right away that the things you were being asked to implement were overtly hostile to Jews. I find the whole concept of it fascinating. How do you justify anti-Semitism built in this thing that is supposed to elevate those who are oppressed? I don't even. What's the hardwiring mentally to get there? The jujitsu in someone's mind to get to a place where being anti-Semitic is fair or equitable somehow.
Yeah, that was something I felt like I fell down a black hole or a rabbit hole when I went into D.E.I. No, truly, Chris, like I had never seen educators acting and speaking and behaving in this way. And then at an institutional level, we're talking about, even the academic senate, who's supposed to be there to protect all faculty, not acting. So when I first started, as I mentioned to you earlier, I did these needs assessment conversations. And that's where it was brought to my awareness that there was a problem of anti-Semitism, not just at De Anza College, but in the whole Foothill De Anza district. It's a 2-district, small community college district. And multiple people gave me examples of what they were calling anti-Semitism. And I agreed with them that the examples were anti-Semitism. And I said, oh, wow, this is no good. I knew I was going to have to act because my job, part of it, was to lead a campus-wide transformation around equity, social justice, and multicultural education. And not only that, but to promote inclusion on the campus. And to me, Chris, when I hear inclusion, that I'm an educator. I want every single person in the community to feel that they can be their most authentic self and that they're welcomed, appreciated.
Speak freely, yeah.
Yes, and that we have a viewpoint diversity where we encounter, some ideas that may be different from our own. And that's what college is all about. That's where you grow. And so as I started to hear from people, I was also seated on what was called the Equity Action Council. And this was a farcical group as well. They didn't focus on fairness from my perspective. They did very little action on the campus, but yet they're getting taxpayer-funded dollars, to engage in these activities. And our local Hillel representative came to the Equity Action Council. This is early on, right after all these needs assessment conversations where I had already heard multiple examples of the deeply entrenched anti-Semitism. And they said, this campus is not safe for Jewish students. And they said, and we want to help make it right. We have some recommendations for you all. Would you please take a look at them? Would you please, you have this site where it says standing against racism. Would you please just put a little thing? You have a Black Lives Matter thing there. You have a Stop AAPI hate thing there. Just put a little thing that says, we stand against anti-Semitism so our Jewish students can feel a little safer. And they asked us simple things like that. And as they were presenting, some of my staff members were dropping into the chat links to the Jewish Voices for Peace and Students for Justice for Palestine and all of these other organizations, which are known to be anti-Israel. They're known to be, anti-Jewish. And after that happened, we went back to our team meeting and I said, hey, I was very offended that we had guests speaking to us at Equity Action Council. And you all felt fit to put these links that were antithetical to what they were saying. And their affect was flat. They made no apologies for it. They said, you were putting resources, so we can put resources too. Wow. And I said, but these were guests and they were talking to us about important things. And I said, so what about the recommendations they gave us? And my supervising dean said, well, we've got recommendations from CARE, which is the Council on Islamic Relations. And we didn't ever do any of those either. So we're not going to do anything about them. And I said, we're not going to do anything? How could we just ignore the pain that this woman shared, when she came here and that she told us about how the students are hurting, how they were hurt by the student government who when they took a resolution, they wanted the student government to adopt the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And instead, they were shouted down by their own peers. And they were shouted down with chants of "From the rivers to the sea, Palestine will be free." I asked her, do you know what that means? And she said, no, you tell me. I said, that means the obliteration of Israel. I said, that's not okay. That's not okay to have an environment where your peers are saying that to you as a student. Would you feel welcome?
May I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt on this story, but this is a great part to interject and ask, do these people truly understand it? Or is it just something they're parroting because they think it sounds good? Do they mean these things? I mean, should we understand that so many of these people, these councils, these committees, and the things they say, is it feel-good stuff? Is it a grift of some kind? Is it sincerely held beliefs?
Oh, yes. These are real beliefs, and they mean what they say. Mm-hmm. They mean what they say. Because not only did supervising dean end up saying, you weren't there, that didn't happen that way, all of these kind of things. But they refused to update their website to just put a simple statement saying, we stand against anti-Semitism, not defining it, not getting into IRA and all of that. And there's debates, right? I understand that. But not even that. And I said, this is a performative act. I said, we don't even have to do anything. All you have to do is just put a statement on the website. You don't have to do anything else. Why would you not do that? And they said, because Jews are white oppressors and we're decentering whiteness here.
Oh boy.
And that's when I knew. I was like, what? How could you say that? I said, you are not understanding the history. There's an ignorance here around, the Jewish diaspora and the diversity of it. And so, I knew that not only did the campus need education, but my own staff and my own supervising dean needed education and accurate information. They had been fully steeped in an ideology that was toxic towards Jewish people. And so our district board of trustees around this same time, they made a resolution saying that it was a very flat one. They didn't define anti-Semitism. They just said, we as a district stand against it. It was empty. But I took that and I said, that's our cue. That's our board of trustees. They direct us, even above me and you and the dean and everyone, right? So I'm going to go ahead and engage this community in some Jewish inclusion and anti-Semitism education. And my dean did not support me in that. My staff did not support me in that. And I was a director, a quote unquote director, but I had no access to my budget, never saw my budget for the whole 2 years I was there. I don't know how that equity money was being spent. Taxpayer dollars, public funds should be open to everybody. And it's not just that place, Chris. This is happening on so many other campuses.
Sure.
When I was terminated, I heard from people across the nation who were telling me, this is happening at my campus. This goes on here. Our DEI department is toxic. They're anti-Semitic. They don't make any statements. And the recent events have even shown their faces more, the silence from these universities and colleges.
Yeah. Dr. Lee,
all of them who released these statements supporting Ukraine and this and that, they've been silent at the terrorism that's happened against Israel. And that, to me, that is showing us who they are and what they stand for. And it's time for all of us to say, if that doesn't represent you and your values, pull the funding from your schools, pull the funding if you're a philanthropist giving to a school in your alma mater, check out what they're doing. And if it doesn't align with your values, remove that funding. It shouldn't be there. And these programs shouldn't be there either if what they're doing is promoting hate and exclusion.
Dr. Lee, when I hear you say a dean said, Israel, white oppressors, as a white guy, I'm not Jewish, but I am white. That makes me wonder. I have to ask the question: I had kind of theorized this. Is it all one and the same to people like these? That if you are white, be you Jewish or Christian or agnostic, if you are white, you're inherently just an oppressive person just because you exist as white? Is that a broader context or no?
Yes. Well, not only that, let me tell you about this one, Chris. Early on, this was 2 weeks into my 2-year adventure here at that place. I had a Google Doc that I was using with, my staff, because I was supposed to lead a strategic, transformation, and you have to plan and, and take notes and so forth. And I was showing it to the team, and I was saying, hey, I'm new here, maybe, we can collaborate together. I've said it so we can all edit, we can put in events and put in ideas together. And one of my staff members stopped me and they said, stop what you're doing right now. And I was like, whoa. And they were angry. And they said, what you're doing is you're white speaking and you're white splaining and you're supporting white supremacy.
Oh,
and I was like, what? In my whole life as a Black woman, I had never been called a white supremacist or told that I was supporting white supremacy. And these people were serious. And I said to them, I said, hey, I just got here. I haven't come in here name calling or saying any words to you that are offensive. I said, where I come from, I was raised in the Central Valley of California, a small town called Lodi. I said, I knew and encountered growing up actual white supremacists, KKK members, white National Socialists. I said, for you to call me a white supremacist is deeply offensive.
Wow.
I said, please don't call me, any names again. So let's just be professional together. And it was as though I had offended that person, and everyone began to behave as though I was the offensive one for saying that. And that was early.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I can't thank you enough for educating me. Anyway, I'll speak for myself. I would imagine many in this audience, this is kind of the first peek behind the curtain of what this actually means. These terms are thrown around a lot, and I think a lot of people feel intimidated by them because they come from higher education and academia, and people think, well, maybe they're smarter than me, or maybe they know something I don't, and they kind of defer or demur. And I'm so grateful that you're telling these stories so that we can learn what you've actually seen and what you've experienced. I hope there will be more conversations like this. By the way, again, the piece in the New York Post, dated on the 18th of October, was I was a DEI director, DEI drives campus antisemitism. Also in the Wall Street Journal and a publication called Free Black Thought. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time today. It's invaluable.
Thank you.
That blows my mind.
Yeah.
The things that she was saying and what she encountered, obviously, given the circumstances of what we are sitting out looking at today with the news that's happening, when we have pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas even demonstrations, and she was sitting on a campus being told by her colleagues that she was wrong, couldn't stand up for members of students that were there, that were Jewish, that were saying, like, this is a flat out anti-Semitic campus. What are we going to do about it? Because that is what you would expect somebody to come in. When you have racial incidents, when you have problems, you do want to solve them. You do want to make your environment inclusive for all, but not to the exclusion of somebody else. You don't bring this up to slam this down, and I think that's where the discrepancy starts to happen.
And what she, we could have done probably hours. I mean, she had lots to say, and she was very passionate about it. One of the things she said even after we wrapped up the interview was, Chris, today, to tell students that they should be on time, basic conscientiousness, she says in the world of DEI, that is oppressive white language. And she says that people in this world of DEI are now telling themselves, one another, and students that to be on time is a function of being white, and it's an oppressive notion. So this is far beyond, as you heard today, this is far beyond equity.
No, and
equality.
It really is just, it's irony, I think, a little bit, I would say, at the height of irony in some ways, because you are doing so much that is damaging when you're trying to undo the so-called damage, yet you create and inflict more, and now you have a bigger problem than what you started with, I think, because now you've got another group, our sons, for example, people that are told, you're the problem, don't talk to me about this because you've had all these experiences and I don't buy into that. I don't play into that. I don't like excuses, period, whether you're rural living or skin color or a religion or whatever. I don't buy into those as reasons to not want to do my best or make the best attempt at something, or a female for that matter. I can't stand the idea that, I'm a victim in any way because I'm female, because a couple 100 years ago or 100 years ago, women couldn't do something. Right. I don't see that now. And I don't let that viewpoint kind of permeate things. I think it all kind of falls into that same umbrella.
The soft bigotry of low expectations, Bush once called it. I thought that was a great turn of phrase.
That's good,
He was talking about
for sure.
Equal outcomes in education.
It's food for thought. I mean, it is food for thought, and it is something that parents need to be aware of, because it is not a college campus. It's a high school. It's everywhere.
As I said in the interview, be forewarned, just about every district in the country now is or is entertaining this position of DEI director.
Or changing the name and the letters to make it something else more palatable for people.
Very well-paid people, almost none of whom are white, and all of whom have this colossal axe to grind, this notion that white equals oppressor. And their express function is to show up and point out all the ways in which white constructs must be deconstructed. It's poison. It's just toxic. it
But
would
you know,
be
I was
very
thinking
difficult
her
for
one
me.
thing, you know, condemning, like to not be allowed to condemn something like anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
That is awful. Like where do you not study World War? Like, do you not look back even beyond, like before World War II? Like
Right.
there's a history of that extends so far back. And so to act like that there's only one issue, which has to do with just this rate, like it's not just a white or black thing. Like I don't know. It's a bigger problem.
Well, leave us a 5-star review. I hope you will, because I think that conversation was worth it, to be perfectly honest with you. And I hope you'll share it, frankly, with other people you know. Others need to know what she had to say. I think that we got to take the bloom off of the rosy language and dig deeper to understand what it really means and how insidious it really is. So I hope you leave a review, maybe a written review. Stay in touch with us on all our social media, which is all linked below the podcast in our show description. And we will be back at it right here next week on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. Please rate and comment on the show, as well as subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.